Hello, everyone, and welcome to our episode of the Challenges podcast. Today, we have a very interesting topic for you. We have discussed in the previous episodes how some of the leaders in large banks are dealing with disruptions. But the question is, how should mid tier banks compete with these large banks? How do they drive innovations? And this is where we have a very interesting guest for us today. Please welcome to the podcast, Mihaela, who is the Chief Credit Officer for First National Bank of Omaha. Mihaela, a warm welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Vikas. Good to be here.
And Mihaela, before we jump into some tough questions, we want to have some icebreakers here. We want the audience to know you a little bit more. And with that, I'm going to start with a few questions, if you don't mind. And I read
Absolutely.
where, Mihaela, that whenever you are traveling, you make it a point to go to a local bookstore, pick up a new book to read. What is a book that you've read lately that you would want to recommend to the audience, and why does it resonate with you?
I travel in the US and internationally. I go at least once a year to Romania, where I grew up. And I have a favorite bookstore in Iași, Romania, the city where my original family still lives. And I go there and get a new book and read it in Romanian. And sometimes I must switch to the version in English if the language is too modern or technical. And one book that I picked up there and I would definitely recommend is All the Light We Cannot See, All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. I heard that the movie generated some backlash. I have not watched the movie, but the book to me spoke about how trying to change your circumstances and going into something that appears to be an amazing opportunity sometimes can end up being more devastating than your original situation. Sometimes finding a way to look at the light where you are is the best way to go about life. Sort of like because the saying, what is a rich person? One that is happy with what they have.
Absolutely. I think that's a amazing philosophy as well. Try to be
Yeah,
content with all
gratitude.
the things that you have. Absolutely. Now, this sounds very, very interesting, Mihaela. I think I and probably a few of the members of the audience will also pick up that book. One more question for you. I think when you look at, and you talked about a little bit about gratitude as well, right? When you start your day or in the day itself, what is one small thing that brightens your day?
Coffee, absolutely, because I am a huge snob. Maybe not as much as my friends. I have a new coffee maker. It looks cool and it can import coffee recipes that my friends text me. I have to say that I keep it pretty basic, but yeah, coffee brighten my days and I am very particular about it. It's always no flavors, always black.
That is great. Next time when we meet now, I know what to order for you.
Yeah, that's right. But why it's tricky, like I said, because it's not an easy task.
I hear you. With that, let's jump into our discussion today, Mehela. And before we go there, first of all, I would want to congratulate you to making the list of most powerful women to watch in 2025. And I'm pretty sure not only within your bank itself, but I think within the industry, you are a role model for many, many women leaders across the nation. And then I think the another interesting part, which many of the people in the audience don't know yet, is that you started your career in teaching before you built a career in banking. I'm pretty sure the journey would have had its ups and downs. Can you share with the audience like what the journey was and what are the critical milestones and what kept you going through all these years?
Yeah, and thanks, because but I'd say that at the American Banker Women in Banking event last fall in November, I met so many impressive women, and it was truly energizing to be part of the conversation with them. I bet actually, because that many of them would be great contributors to your podcast. But in terms of my career journey, as you stated, I started with a teaching job at the university where I graduated from in Iași, Romania. At the time, I was pursuing a PhD in applied statistics. And speaking of highs and lows, I started having some disagreements with my PhD advisor. At the same time, when a group of professors from the University of Nebraska started a collaboration with my university and visiting there. So I started working with the professors in Nebraska and ended up visiting the US and eventually joining a good friend at the bank I currently work for. It is hard for me to believe and actually super hard to explain to my 22-year-old friends how I'm still here after 27 years at the same bank. But the company I joined 27 years ago is actually very different, and it evolved a lot compared to the bank that it is today in a very good way. And it evolved so much during this quarter century that I always had many diverse opportunities to learn and have an impact. I started here as a credit analyst, then took on building the data science function, moved to marketing, then compliance, and now I'm back in credit as you said, because as the chief credit officer. That have been definitely highs. We continue to have a very good decision science function, and the individuals leading the charge now are the ones I hired 20 years ago. We successfully resolved some regulatory criticism about 10 years ago, and we worked with speed and energy through the pandemic and the 13% unemployment rate that we all experienced, just to name a few of the highs, and also challenges. I took a step down before moving back up in my career. And at the time, I really felt stuck for a number of years. Another challenge when we were working to clean up the regulatory issues I talked about, I worked so hard that I ended up falling asleep at the wheel, and literally, that is not a
Oh
figure
my
of
God.
speech. And more recently, after the pandemic, when we tightened underwriting, that generated significant conflict with my peers. So what kept me going, to your question, is of course my family, and for sure the immigrant fight to prove oneself in a new culture. There's so many ways in which how we do things is misunderstood and makes us double down to fix everything. I heard Soledad O'Brien say it in a way that resonated with who I am. I will absolutely, positively outwork you.
No, I think that's great to hear, Mihaela. Right? I think the more you put a hard work in something, the better you get at it, the better you're able to go and perform there. So I'm pretty sure that's going to be encouraging for a lot of the audience out there as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I know how to do it differently because yeah, it's just the way that's the way I am.
But we'll leave a caution to the audience as well. Don't fall
Yeah,
asleep on the wheel. Work that hard.
that is not good. That's definitely not something I would.
Absolutely. So with that, Mihaela, we will jump to our next section, and we call it dealing with disruptions. This is where actually it's very, very interesting to talk to you as a risk leader. You have managed multiple recessions, right? And then it hasn't been easy for the industry overall. And I'm pretty sure you also had to go and get the group rallied around some core principles, some of the things that you wanted to do. So my question to you would be, what principles, what frameworks have helped you manage that uncertainty? Because whenever something like this happens, it's always not predicted, right? And it happens very, very quickly. And as a leader, then you have to make a lot of decisions with little data, little performance data, and a lot of these things are still going to happen in the future. So how do you deal with that? Is there any lessons that you would want to share with our audience on that?
For me, in a crisis, urgency for action is very important. The time to plan and debate alternatives is not that, though we should absolutely have conversation. But urgency, simplicity, and communication are very important. And having a team that can execute is critical in times of crisis. And that is also not something you build at that time, right? Like you have to have a team that you can rely on before the crisis hit. But yeah, I would say simplicity and actions and urgency are super important.
That is very, very interesting, Mihaela. And then do you think it is easier or more tougher for a mid-tier bank to act with speed compared to a large bank?
So, for us, our organization is very focused, ongoing on being a flat organization. We believe in being close to the customer at any level in the organization, and being that we're privately held and not huge. That has been a core principle of ours. So I think it's easier because we don't have 15 layers of organizational structure to get through. We're very flat, and the decisions are made very quickly. The owner is right there with us, working in the office next to me. So I do believe that it's a lot easier for a mid-sized bank to act.
So that is a great lesson, Mihaela, actually acting with speed and then also giving that power to people to make those decisions fast is very, very important, especially in a scenario where things are uncertain, where there are multiple paths which are available to you. So that is going to be very, very helpful for our audience as well. But I'll add one more thing. It's not just acting with speed. I know you also do a lot of homework before you make any decision. And I will cite actually in one of the interviews, Clark who is FNBO chairman and president, has called you a learning machine. I think I would want to definitely know, how did you gain this reputation?
Yeah, so first of all, Clark is an individual that reads an enormous amount. So when you talk to him, when you run into him and he talks about a book, and occasionally I happen to know that book, that feels like a success, and it feels like I am also reading a lot, but really a comparable scale, probably not as much. But I also try to have respect for any role I take. So when I led compliance, for example, though I was put in a role because I could get things done and we needed to get some things done, I didn't necessarily have the compliance background. I spent a significant time studying the laws and regulations. And in 3 years, when I was allowed, I passed the what is called the CRCM certification, which is a four-hour exam that I took in DC, and I passed, and it's something that I am very proud of. But I also have learned not to take my academic ability too seriously. And there's so many ways of being smart. And I have learned that we need people that are smart negotiators and smart socially and artistically and many other types of smart to have a cohesive team.
That's very, very powerful, Mihaela. And again, that theme of always learning new things, always upskilling ourselves and trying to learn from like any avenue that we can get. That's very, very impressive as well. With that, Mihaela, we're going to pick your thoughts. So now this section we called bold predictions. And we are at a stage today where there's a lot of uncertainty out there in the industry. And especially when you look at within the banking sector. There was a recent report by Morgan Stanley which talked about this hidden risk within the US commercial banking market, especially when they talked about the software and technology sectors. And then also there's overall this fear of AI disrupting jobs, creating more unemployment. When you look at 2026 as a year, how do you think about it? Like, do you see there are a lot of risks for us? Do you think it's going to be actually a good growth year? US economy has grown very well last year. Will it continue to do that? Or do you think there's going to be a mix of some good news, some bad news? And how are you preparing for that?
Well, listen and read a lot about the economy. And because at the bank, we use Moody's economic scenarios, forecast scenarios in our credit forecasting, I listen to them more often. And about a week ago, they published different macroeconomic scenarios with AI as a major theme. And the podcast, they have a weekly podcast that comes out on Friday, and the following podcast after they published the paper, they were talking about their scenarios, and they were themselves surprised, adding up all the probabilities of the scenarios, that they were actually saying that the unemployment rate will likely rise sometime in, probably not necessarily 2026, but definitely 2027 because of AI. In short, the way I would describe their perspective, I hope I do a good job. AI could be either a bursting bubble or a tidal wave, and both create turbulences, but in very different ways. To expand a little bit, a rise in unemployment can happen because AI falls flat. And the way they described this was similar to Y2K, when there's a lot of hype and then a correction in the stock market happened. And we all know that AI companies, as you said, because are such a big component of the stock market today. Everybody's talking about the concentration in the a big seven, right, which are primarily technology AI company. And I believe most economists expect a market correction, which will create job losses, right? There's going to be the wealth effect, but also the companies that will have to lay off people because of the stock market correction. And the other scenario is almost the opposite, that AI will move so fast with so much power that a large segment of the workforce will be displaced without alternatives in the short run. And so these two scenarios, I believe they're likely, but I don't think they will have a significant impact on banking in 2026. To your question, right? What do I think about 2026? I'm optimistic about banking this year, primarily because we are a quarter into the year and banking trends move, I think, with a 6 to 9 months lag in terms of outcomes. If um, consumer trends start happening, that will impact charge 6 to 9 months from now. Um, what we're seeing now, to me, suggests stability for 2026 in banking.
That is great to hear, Mihaela. And I was talking to some other leaders as well. They believe that while even in the slightly, I would say, mid to longer term, a lot of the AI revolutions and other revolutions in the past, they bring in some uncertainty in the short term, but overall they end up creating a lot more jobs than the ones that get impacted. So we'll be optimistic. And
Yeah, I
of
mean,
course,
I can say that a lot of things happen and be non-committal about the outcome. But you're asking me to make bold predictions because I'm going to make a bold prediction and think that that we're going to have a great year.
I, I hope that the bold prediction comes true, Mihaela. I think the
I do
bank
too.
industry does need it, and we'll look forward to that. But your message also, I think, when you talked a little bit about the learning and upskilling ourselves, I think that applies here as well. I think while the AI will create some disruption, but as more and more of us and our colleagues start learning about these capabilities, start looking at how it applies to our day-to-day work, the more we'll be ready for future as well. So
Yeah, we allowed access to AI tools to all our employees. So that's over 4,500 people, and we have robust training programs for them. And so we think of that as almost like the base level of AI enablement in the bank. And then we think about ground up generated use cases that
mhm.
primarily address optimization of workflows. And then we think about top down, very large priorities and investment opportunities that transform the business. And we all need to learn at all those levels how to use AI.
But I love the framework of Hela using top down ideas, big ideas, but also driving bottom up innovations. And together, I'm pretty sure they're going to transform the way that the bank operates. So we'll look forward to that. Maybe in a few years, we'll have you back again and talk about how the journey has been.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Because looking forward to it.
But before we absolutely, Mihaela, but before we let you go, I would definitely want to have as a wrap up for our discussion today. Want you to share with the audience here. Is there a guiding theme or philosophy that you would want to leave with them?
So, just generally I'm a optimistic person, and the way I think about change, we talked about AI, and you and I talked about other changes that are happening, Vikas, and I think that changes will always be, and in our industry, definitely in banking, I think that's what I like about banking. It's a always changing industry, and in our
Absolutely.
lives. But again, we've always had change. And I fundamentally have faith that the world is bent towards good, to borrow from Dr. King's famous quote. I believe we are resilient as an industry, banking, and as people, and we will adapt.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the takeaways for me from our discussion today is definitely, I think when you look at any problem, I think moving with conviction, moving with speed, and then maybe if needed, changing course later, but moving with speed and moving with conviction is very, very important. And I also loved your idea of saying whenever you're doing something, go deep, learn about it, and then that learning will always help you make a better decision. I think that is also very, very important. And then I love the optimism. Feel that I think a lot of our audience, if they take even 10% of that, they will be much more pumped and excited about what they do day to day. And then, absolutely, I think AI is changing our industry, but I think all of us have that power and an ability to go and start looking at how it helps us in doing our work a little bit better every day. And then I think those are some of the lessons our audience will also take away. With that, Mihail, I'll pause here. Thanks a lot for making time available for us. And then for those of you in the audience, please feel free to look up Mihaela over LinkedIn, follow her. She has shared a bunch of nuggets here today, but a lot more gets shared over LinkedIn as well. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be a lot more informative, exciting nuggets that you can find from Mihaela from now over the future months as well. So thanks a lot, Mihaela.
Absolutely. Thanks, Vikas. Good to talk to you as always. And don't forget, get enough sleep. Don't work too hard.
That is another lesson I'll take away from here. Get enough sleep so you are ready for making all the right decisions.
That's right. That's right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Talk to you
Thank
next
you.
time.